And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on our podcast today, which I thank you for, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Lisa Nirell. She's the founder of Energize Growth, which helps CMOs and CEOs accelerate marketing, innovation, and growth. She's a speaker, she's a keynoter, she's an author. She's written two books. The first one was The Mindful Marketer, How to Stay Present and Profitable in a Data-Driven World. And then she also wrote Energize Growth Now, The Marketing Guide to a Wealthy Company. One of the really interesting things that Lisa does that we'll get into in a couple of minutes is she moderates and runs these CMO communities in a couple of different cities, and they're really, really interesting, and it's an interesting way to scale and leverage content. Anyway, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks so much, Pete. Good morning.
Good morning. So let's see, where do we start here? Give us, how did you wake up one day and wind up where you are today? I'm sure this was totally planned and linear, and you're exactly where you are, depending on what those plans were when you started, right?
Yes, and the Beatles were right when they said life is what happens when you're busy making other plans.
So how did we get here? Tell us that story a little bit.
Well, it started when my business launched 17 and a half years ago, if you can believe that. It definitely took me 15 years to become an overnight success. And that was my story. It was a lot of early mistakes and experiences. Some worked out, some did not. But one thing that was really beginning to evolve about 6.5 years ago was that I noticed that the marketing profession I once knew and loved was under so much disruption. And chief marketing officers were really struggling to make sense of it all. They were suddenly being asked to be not just brand ambassadors, but customer experience experts. And then a whole bunch of them told me they had revenue quota, even though many of them never sold anything in their lives.
Well, and they were being held, starting probably 15 years ago, plus to sort of stringent data requirements, right? It used to just be branding, and branding's good, and then sort of Google comes along and changes the game and says, well, what's the ROI on each and every campaign to the third decimal point? That was sort of a different world for marketers, I would imagine.
Yes, and that certainly inspired my second book, how do you stay present and profitable in a data-driven world? And how do you continue to convince the board and your CEO that it's not all about lead gen and demand gen? There's an element and a sheer need for someone to stand up for your organization's brand. And that takes time and patience, and you can't always fit the ROI numbers on a spreadsheet.
In each domain. No, that's correct. So let's talk a little bit about, you've got all these different things that you do, but the common DNA obviously is from the marketing perspective, right? That's your expertise. So you've got the books, you keynote, you've got the groups. Walk me through how you, I guess it's really a two-part question. Develop and nurture your content, number one, and then decide which modalities to put it into from a business standpoint, right? So take the content that's in a book and derivative of that in a speech, and then the CMO group. Show me how it all connects together.
Yes, Pete, what I've found is that people just learn in different ways. And there was a time when I started writing books close to 9 years ago, it was really all about having books as your sophisticated business card to hand out to prospective clients. And you know this because of the work you do with thought leaders. And I never wanted to abandon that. However, it was interesting. There were three things that I started to do differently. One is when I wrote my next book, I designed it very differently than the first book. So I called them Twitter-sized chapters in my book so that any CEO or CMO that picked up The Mindful Marketer would be able to digest a very pithy idea or strategy in just a matter of a few minutes.
So let me play that back to you. So I don't have to necessarily read the book cover to cover. I can pick up chapter 7. It's, whatever, 10 pages, and I have a distinct concept that's relevant that I can go run and do something with. High applicability.
Exactly. And so I have two chapters dedicated to how CMOs can deepen their trust and relationships with their sales organization. And they don't need to spend 4 hours poring over all the research. They can just dive right in. So that was the first change that I made, is to make things very digestible and even more pragmatic than I have in the past. The second thing is, I noticed, and you'll see this in today's Wall Street Journal, is that the new generation of marketers and marketing leaders learn differently. And today's top content providers, including my work with LinkedIn Learning, is those providers are creating content that is easily digestible on mobile devices.
Well, let's touch on that for a minute. So back in the Stone Ages, when you and I were in school, right, during the Flintstones, you would sit through lectures for hours and hours and hours and hours, and you would actually read textbooks on and on and on. And there was a lot of, what we would call today, from an adult learning perspective, push learning. I'm going to fill up your brain with everything you need to know about marketing, and then at some point you will extract it when you need it. Much of what's happening now is what we call pull learning, right? So I need to do X tomorrow. Where can I go right now and pull down a little nugget that will help me do that? Whether that's sort of the DIY stuff on YouTube, how do I change a tire, to how do I have a difficult conversation with an employee. And I think what happens with content people is we tend to be a little nerdy. We tend to like to write. We tend to be readers. So we think people are like us. And we have to realize, and it's a great point that you made, that as the market shifts, you have to shift the format and the modality and the way that you present your work to make it applicable. You mentioned LinkedIn. Tell me a bit what you're doing on LinkedIn Learning, because that is a fast growing platform.
LinkedIn Learning has thousands and thousands of courses, all video learning, along with quizzes and transcripts on their site. They bought a company called lynda.com a while back. And now it's called LinkedIn Learning. And they have production studios in Southern California. And so I'm very happy that our first course was launched, it was called the Effective CMO. And it is a wonderful course for people who either don't know what is involved with being a CMO, or they want to get to work more effectively with their own CMO, or they're a young professional who wants someday to become a CMO. And also, I'm finding marketing agencies are enjoying the course. And then we have a host of other courses that we'll be working on in the coming year.
So tell me a little bit about the benefit to you and your business in partnering with LinkedIn and getting your stuff out there. Is that lead gen? Is it branding? Is it sort of a new form of a book as a business card? What are the benefits to you in partnering with them?
Yes, I am very pleased that this was one of those test and learn experiments that actually paid off. So even though I was hoping on the high end to be able to just reach more people around the world through LinkedIn's 500 million users who have profiles on LinkedIn, I've actually achieved more than I expected. So I have generated clients from it, and much more brand awareness based on some of the kinds of inquiries I'm receiving. And more importantly, I selected working with them because their brand aligns nicely with my brand in terms of their commitment to high quality content delivered on a really, I'll call it an elegant platform, because I really think it is an elegant platform compared to trying to pour over YouTube and get through the maelstrom of content there.
Well, and it's a straight B2B play. It's not one of these information marketing online whatever. I mean, LinkedIn is serious business, right? So you don't have to have unnecessary sizzle and ridiculous promises. Let me ask you this as a thought leader, right? So you've done workshop, you run communities, you speak. What was it like for you to be able to go through the process of translating the content into bite-sized formats that's delivered via video? How did you have to rethink the efficacy for the learner on the other end of that?
The focus I always have is, I have this mantra in my head, and it's be laconic, not loquacious.
Okay, decode that for me.
I think it's very easy for me and a few of my friends who are also thought leaders and experts to want to share everything we know with the prospective client,
Right.
to either show off our knowledge or our prowess, or just to massage our own ego.
Right.
And I think that's really a shame to fall into that trap. It's more, what can we deliver to them just in time and be a great trusted advisor? And I keep thinking of that. And then I also have to say that I owe a debt of gratitude to one of my producers at LinkedIn. Lauren really helped me in taking my content and keeping and being and delivering it in a way that's very laconic, so that those messages and those key lessons can be delivered in 2 to 4 minutes. And so she also made me a better communicator as a result.
That's great. I think the first point, I want to go back up to the first point that you mentioned, is that we all have a tendency, because we're so passionate about what we do and there's so much we have to say, of sort of giving too much. And what I mean by that is, you've got whatever, whether it's a half hour workshop or a 5 minute video, you want to give them and give them and give them and give them. And the reality is, from a learning perspective, again, less is more, right? So if I can watch a 4 or 5 minute video and walk away with one concept that I can actually do one thing with tomorrow when I get back to work, that's a home run, right? If you hit me with 37 concepts and whatever, it may seem fascinating and intriguing, but I just froze. I go into this sort of deer in the headlights, and therefore I can't decode which one to actually use and apply. So it's a little bit counterintuitive for a thought leader to sort of slow it down and deliver short bite-sized nuggets that only have one thing, even though there's 12 other things you can touch on tangential to that piece of content. Would you agree?
I would agree with that. And I also believe in keeping a balance in how we learn as adults. Because if you look at the talent that's required, the skills that are required in the future workplace, critical thinking rises to the top of the list.
Absolutely.
So I'm not suggesting that we give that up, that we stop daydreaming, or that we stop making time or creating an afternoon to be able to truly reflect and just read a book. That doesn't go away. However, during a typical work week, those on-demand lessons can be really powerful and helpful to turn from concept into practice.
Yeah, and I think the point that you make is an important one, that it's not a binary world. We're not advocating only consume content in 1 minute nuggets, right? There's a time to sit down with a cup of tea or whatever and dive into a great book for 3 hours and really, really go deep. There are other times in our busy work days where we need an answer to a question, right? We have a real situation and we've only got a couple of minutes to get some insight on that that's highly relevant. But, it's not the same as deep, thoughtful, reflective deep dives into a piece of work there. So that's a great point. Anything else you would share with regards to keeping the relevance when you move from modality to modality, right? So there's a different cadence and challenge you have when writing a book, long form, versus a blog versus speaking. How do you sort of juggle that?
I want to remind everybody that there is no formula. There is no magic formula. It's much like when we work with CMOs, and I'm an advisor to CMOs or working with them in private communities. One of the things that I learned from them that I appreciate greatly is that the most successful, high performing CMOs are really effective and willing to embrace change and test new concepts out in low risk environments. So that so many of them now have embraced agile marketing strategies and approaches. Taking that from the software development world and adapted it to how marketing is executed. So I do my best to embrace very similar approaches and say, all right, let's see how this goes with LinkedIn Learning. Oh, let's see how this goes with writing my book differently or delivering more video content on my own blogs. So those are the types of things that I encourage people to do, is to realize, plant 1,000 seeds and see which ones bloom, and then pick your top 3 to 5 and go deeper in those areas.
Yeah, no, well said. I want to pivot for a moment to something that you do a lot of that's really intriguing and interesting to lots of folks, which is the CMO peer community. So obviously your expertise is on the marketing side, but focus a little bit, if you could, on the power of community, right? Because we live in this digital world, we're all getting our content digitally, but you're bringing together high level folks actually together, like in the same room, looking in one another's eyes, sharing a meal. Talk to me about sort of the power of communities and how you anchor that with your content, sort of the content context back and forth on that.
Yes, and I do want to also circle back and remind people that if you're interested to see what kind of content has been successful, you can visit lisanirell.com, and you can also go download some free bonuses at themindfulmarketer.com/bonus, in order to see some of the things that have worked well for me and adapt to your own circumstances and client base.
Great, thank you.
The CMO communities we've created is, to me, a third form of delivering ideas and content. The difference being is that I kind of remove some of the pressure from myself to always be the smart person in the room. The CMOs I've worked with the last 6 years told me, with all the changes going on, they need a safe haven to innovate, solve problems, and share resources. So we've created those safe havens. We turn off any of the recordings. We all sign non-disclosures, and together they work in a non-competitive environment to address their most pressing issues and challenges. And then we bring great guest speakers in, like Chip Conley and Wendy Lee, and a host of Dory Clark and other people who can bring their thought leadership too to the world of marketing.
And what is the sort of the format and cadence? Because these are obviously, like everybody else, super duper busy people. They've got a lot on their plate, a lot of obligations. So what are their commitments in terms of the format and the cadence and participation and such?
The commitment levels are outlined on my website. You can go to one of them is marketingleadersofdc.com, and the other is marketingleadersofatlanta.com. And that lays out the programs in more detail.
Great.
We design them around busy CMOs who tend to travel a lot more than CEOs typically. So
Yep.
a lot of our content is face to face, and they also receive consulting services and regular coaching from me, as well as from each other. And then we bring them together once a year at a conference as well, so people can learn more.
Great. So what advice would you give someone? So let's say their content is not similar to yours, right? It has nothing to do with marketers. Sort of the principles of creating a community that works well, because that's worked quite well for you. So what are the things that you could share that you've learned if someone's out there thinking about, yeah, I'd like to create a community for X, whatever X is based on their content?
I would suggest three things. First of all, select your members really carefully. In other words, don't assume everyone's going to be a good member because they have a checkbook.
Right.
That would be my first piece of advice. Some people are really afraid to be vulnerable because they think it's a sign of failure.
Yep.
People in that mindset struggle in those settings to be efficacious. And the second thing I would suggest is design the program around the needs of your members. You've probably heard of Young Presidents Organization or Vista. That model does not work for CMOs.
No.
It's too much. It's, what is it, like 12, 15 hours a month that they invest? It's a lot of time. That doesn't work for a modern marketing leader. Then the third thing I would say is to be very intentional around the purpose of the group. We all have a very clear purpose. We read it at the beginning of each meeting. And then when we hit some speed bumps or challenging times as a group, we also have a very clear set of values that we co-developed. And those help us get through the great times as well as the challenging times. Every group that's high functioning is going to have both.
Yeah, of course. Hopefully more of the great ones and the challenges, but oftentimes it's the challenging times that strengthen the bonds and such. So this has been great. I appreciate all that you've shared. There's been a lot here in terms of the LinkedIn learning that you've shared, the development of the communities, the different formats for the books. There's so much stuff here. I appreciate your transparency and your wisdom and your time today. So thank you so much. Last, but before we sort of sign off here, and I think you mentioned a little earlier, how do folks find you? How do they get in touch with you?
People can find me at lisanirell.com. It's NIRELL.com. And I invite people to download some of our free content or visit me on LinkedIn Learning if you wish.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks so much, Lisa.
Thank you, Pete.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.